You say you were surprised at the pace of innovation. What did you think the first time you used a large language model like ChatGPT? Did we surprise you?
I'm just shocked at how good it is. So it gives very coherent answers, and it can do little bits of reasoning. Not very sophisticated reasoning yet, although it'll get much better. So for example, I asked it, this is GPT-4 now, I asked it a puzzle given to me by a symbolic AI guy who thought it wouldn't be able to do it. I actually made the puzzle much harder and it could still do it. And so the puzzle goes like this. The rooms in my house are either white or blue or yellow. Yellow paint fades to white within a year. In 2 years' time, I would like all the rooms to be white. What should I do? And a human being would probably say you should paint the blue rooms white. What GPT-4 said was you should paint the blue rooms yellow, but that works too because the yellow will fade to white. And I don't see how it could do that without understanding the problem. The idea that it's just sort of predicting the next word and using statistics, there's a sense in which that's true, but it's not the sense of statistics that most people understand. From the data, it figures out how to extract the meaning of the sentence, and it uses the meaning of the sentence to predict the next word. It really does understand, and that's quite shocking.
So have you been surprised by the broader reaction, the public reaction to ChatGPT?
Well, given how well it works, I guess the public reaction isn't that surprising. But what's interesting is most people don't say, this doesn't understand. They say, wow, it understood what I said and gave me a coherent answer. What can I use it for? And I think most people are right about that. And of course, it can be used for huge numbers of things. So I know someone who answers letters of complaint for the health service. And he used to spend 25 minutes composing a letter that addresses the problem and so on. Now he just types the problem to GPT-4 and it writes the letter. And then he just looks at the letter and decides if it's okay and sends it out. And that takes him 5 minutes now. So he's now 5 times more efficient. And that's going to happen all over the place. Like paralegals are going to be like that. Programmers are already getting like that. Programmers can be much more efficient if they get assistance from things like GPT-4, because it knows how to program. And you might think it just knows how to program because it's seen a whole lot of programs. So I have a former graduate student who's very smart and a very good programmer. And he did a little experiment, which is, he's called Radford Neal. He took GPT-4 and he defined a new programming language with very unusual syntax. And having defined this programming language, just in text to GPT-4, he then gave it a program and said, what would this do? And it answered correctly. So basically, it could understand the definition of a new programming language and figure out what programs in that language would do. And again, the idea that it's just predicting the next word doesn't make any sense in that context. It had to understand what was going on.
So what do you see as some of the most promising opportunities for this type of AI when it comes to benefiting society?
It's hard to pick one because there's so many. Like, there'll be a huge increase in productivity for any job that involves outputting text. There's all sorts of issues about increasing productivity. In our society, it's not necessarily a good thing to increase productivity because it might make the rich richer and the poor poorer. But in a decent society, just increasing productivity ought to be a good thing. So there'll be things like that. It's wonderful for making predictions. It'll be better at predicting the weather. People don't know by how much yet, but it's already much better at predicting floods. It can predict earthquakes. It can design new nanomaterials. So for things like solar panels, you want to be able to design new nanomaterials, or for superconductivity. I don't know if it's used for superconductivity yet, but it may well be. You'd like that at high temperature. It's really good at designing drugs. That is, finding molecules that will bind to some particular other molecule. DeepMind has used it to create AlphaFold. Now that's not a chatbot, that's just deep learning. But the basic technology of deep learning has pretty much solved the problem of how you figure out from the string of bases in a protein what shape it will adopt. And if you know what shape it adopts, you know its function. The chatbots are just going to be used everywhere, I think.
And we've also talked a lot about healthcare. I mean, you talked about drug discovery, but healthcare is another field that could really benefit.
Yes, both in interpreting medical scans. Like if you take a CAT scan, there's a lot of information in the CAT scan and that isn't being used. And most doctors don't know what the information is. This will be able to get much more out of a CAT scan, as well as being able to compete with doctors at saying what kind of cancer you have or how big it's grown. At present, for example, when a doctor tells you the size of a cancer, you'll get a number like it's 3 centimeters, and a month ago it was 2 centimeters. Now, that's not a very useful number if the thing looks like an octopus, right? A neural net will be able to do much better at understanding the volume of the cancer and how it's changed. So it's going to be tremendous there. And already it's at the level of humans for lots of kinds of scans, and it's going to get better. It's going to be very good for diagnosing diseases. So at present, there's a large number of people die in North America because the doctors misdiagnosed what they had. There's a system that Google's producing called MedPalm2, which has learned to do diagnoses. And it's already, I think it's better than an average doctor now. I'm not quite sure about this because I'm not at Google anymore and it's very recent. But it's certainly comparable with doctors and it's going to get better fast. So wouldn't you like to have a sort of general practitioner, family doctor? You go with some rare disease and you'd love your family doctor to have already seen hundreds of cases of that rare disease. And MedPalm2 is going to be like that. So it's going to be just, in the end, much better at diagnosis.
It sounds like AI will bring many important benefits. But you have expressed concern about the current pace of innovation. Why?
Okay, so for like 50 years, I thought that, well, for 49 years, in order to make digital models better, we needed to make them work more like the brain. So I kept looking at things the brain does and the digital models don't, like rapidly changing connection strengths in a temporary way, and that can make the digital models better. And very recently, I realized that because these digital models have this kind of hive mind where when one agent learns something, all the other agents know it, they might actually already be better than biological intelligence. And so I kind of completely flipped my opinion from the idea it's going to be a long time before they can do everything the brain does. It's going to be 30 to 50 years before they're better than us, which is what I thought for until very recently. A few months ago, I suddenly realized maybe they're already better than us. They're just smaller. And when they get bigger, then they'll be smarter than us. And that was quite scary. It was a sudden change of opinion that instead of being 30 to 50 years, it was 5 years to 20 years, something like that. And so we needed now to take really seriously right now what we're going to do about the issue these things may become smarter than us. It's a time of huge uncertainty and nobody really knows what's going to happen. Maybe things will stall and maybe they won't become smarter than us. But I don't really believe that. I think they're going to be smarter than us. But maybe when they become smarter than us, we'll be able to keep them benevolent and we'll be able to keep them caring much more about people than they care about themselves, unlike people. But maybe not. And so we need to start thinking very hard about those issues. And I'm not an expert on those issues. I'm just an expert on these learning algorithms. And I suddenly realized these superintelligences may be here quite soon. And I'm just sounding the alarm so that people listen to the experts who've been thinking for a long time about how we might stop them taking control. I want the politicians to listen to those guys rather than say, yeah, they're sort of sci-fi guys. It's never going to happen.
Was there like a particular moment when you had this, you said it was very recent, that where you kind of changed your view on it?
I was developing learning algorithms for biological systems that could run in a biological system which didn't use backpropagation. And I couldn't make them work as well as the backpropagation algorithm that we were running these digital systems. And they would work for small networks, but when I scaled it up, the digital ones always scaled up much better than the biological ones. And suddenly I thought it might not be my fault. It might not be that my learning algorithm was just a bad learning algorithm. It might be that these digital systems just are better. And that's when I suddenly changed my mind about how long before we get superintelligence. And then I talked to various former students of mine and former colleagues of mine, and some of them encouraged me to go public with this. Not because I had any solutions that I wanted to recommend. It's not like you can say, burn less carbon and everything will be fine. But because they thought I'm well known in the field, and if I go public by saying superintelligence might be here quite soon, the politicians might start to believe that's a possibility and start listening seriously to the researchers who've been thinking a long time about how we prevent these things from gaining control.
So from your point of view, what role can governments play in helping ensure these AIs are developed in a responsible way?
So there's all sorts of risks other people have talked about a lot, and I don't particularly want to talk about, like they'll take jobs away and increase the gap between the rich and the poor. They will make it impossible to know whether news is fake or real. They will encourage society to divide into two warring camps that don't listen to each other and have completely opposing views. They will build battle robots that are designed to kill people. All of those are well-known risks that I'm not talking about. It's not that I don't think they're important. I think they're probably even more urgent. But lots of other people are talking about those risks. The risk I'm talking about is the risk these things will get smarter than us and eventually take over. And for that risk, there may be something governments can do, because nobody wants that. Well, if you exclude these superintelligences, no people want that. And so all the different governments ought to be able to agree, they ought to be able to work together on preventing that, because it's in their interests. And that's happened before. Even during the Cold War, the US and Russia could work together on trying to prevent there being a global nuclear war, because it was so bad for everybody. And for this existential threat, it should be possible for everybody to work together to limit it, if it's possible to prevent it. I don't know whether it's possible to prevent it, but at least we should be able to get international collaboration on that particular threat, the existential threat of AI taking over. One thing I think should be done is wherever this stuff's being developed, particularly these big chatbots, governments should encourage the companies to put a lot of resources, as these things are getting more and more intelligent, to doing experiments to figure out how to keep them under control. So they should be sort of looking at how these things might try and escape and doing empirical work on that and put a lot of resources into that, because that's the only chance we've got. Before they're super intelligent, we can maybe do experiments and see what's going to go wrong. And I'm strongly of the belief you need empirical data on this. You just can't have philosophers and politicians and legislators making up rules. You need empirical work looking at these things and seeing how they go wrong and seeing how you might control them. And that can only be done by the people developing them. So since you can't stop the development, the best you can do is somehow have governments put a lot of pressure on these companies to put a lot of resources into investigating empirically how to keep them under control when they're not quite as smart as us.